Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahavidyan karavavahai, tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, looks good. This working? That's working fine. Good. Welcome back to the webcast of my weekly class on the Bhagavad Gita. We're currently in the midst of Chapter 4, and we have quite a bit to discuss today. We'll begin with some recitation, as always, beginning with verse 18. And please glance at the meaning and then repeat after me. Not 18. We will begin with verse 24. Sorry. Brahmarpanam brahmahavihi, brahmarpanam brahmahavihi, brahmagnau brahmanahutam, brahmagnau brahmanahutam, brahmaiva tena gantavyam, brahmaiva tena gantavyam, brahma karma samadhina, brahma karma samadhina, daivameva pare yajnam, daivameva pare yajnam, yoginah paryupasate, yoginah paryupasate, brahmagnava pare yajnam, brahmagnava pare yajnam, yajnenaivopajuhvati, yajnenaivopajuhvati, Shrothradinindriyanyanye, Shrothradinindriyanyanye, Samyamagnishu juhvati, Samyamagnishu juhvati, Shabdadin vishayanyanya, Shabdadin vishayanyanya, Indriyagnishu juhvati, Indriyagnishu juhvati, Sarvanindriya karmani, Sarvanindriya karmani, Prana karmani chapare, Prana karmani chapare, Atma samyama yogagnau, Atma samyama yogagnau, Juhvati jnana dipite, Juhvati jnana dipite, Dravya yajnastapo yajna, Dravya yajnastapo yajna, Yoga yajnastatapare, Yoga yajnastatapare, Swadhyaya jnana yajnascha, Swadhyaya jnana yajnascha, Yataya samshritavvrataha, Yataya samshritavvrataha, Apane juhvati pranam, Apane juhvati pranam, Prane panam tatapare, Prane panam tatapare, Prana panagati rudhva, Prana panagati rudhva, Pranayama parayanaha, Pranayama parayanaha, Apare niyataharaha, Apare niyataharaha, Pranan praneshu juhvati, Pranan praneshu juhvati, Sarve pyete yajna vido, Sarve pyete yajna vido, Yajnakshapita kalmashaha, Yajnakshapita kalmashaha. Very good. let us return and pick up the thread. In order to see the context of this series of verses, let's go back to verse 24, where we began our chanting. This one of the better known verses in the Bhagavad Gita shows how various forms of sadhana can be understood from a Vedantic perspective. Our overall context here is various kinds of yagna. Yagna means sacrifice, and specifically making offerings into a sacrificial fire is yagna. North India, they call it havan. In the south, homam. They all mean the same thing. A sacrificial fire is kindled. Various offerings are made into that fire. And it's a very beautiful form of worship. Whatever you offer into the flames is consumed and symbolically transported to the form of God you're invoking through that fire. And that fire, that ritual, that yagna, sacrifice, becomes a metaphor for a very Vedantic perspective on worship. And we saw that so brilliantly in this verse, Brahma Arpanam, a Vedic interpretation of the performance of yajna, and that is the arpanam, the spoon with which you're making the offering, is Brahman, ladle I can call it. Brahma Havihi, the oblation, the sacrificial offering on that ladle is Brahman. Brahmagnao, into the fire, which is Brahman. Brahmana hutam, it is offered by Brahman. Everything is Brahman. Sarvam kalvidam Brahma, as I quoted last week from the Chandogya Upanishad. All this is nothing but Brahman. This then is a Vedantic perspective, the perspective of an enlightened person on all of his various kinds of sadhana. Last week we discussed how even an enlightened person can continue performing various kinds of spiritual practices. They're performing those spiritual practices not out of need for spiritual growth, but they're performing those spiritual practices as an expression of one's own fullness and completeness. And we'll see that as we continue. So this particular verse is a great example, but there are several more examples, and that's what we will see in today's class. A variety of spiritual practices envisioned from the standpoint of Vedanta, in which we understand everything to be a manifestation of Brahman. Let's pick up the thread. We finished verse 25, and we will continue with verse 26. Shrotradinindriyan yanye, Shrotradinindriyan yanye, Samyamagnichu juhvati, Samyamagnishu juhvati, Shabdadin vishayan yanya, Shabdadin vishayan yanya, Indriyagnishu juhvati, Indriyagnishu juhvati. And of the first line, anye, others. And of the second line, juhvati, offer. Others offer. So there are various kinds of offerings, various kinds of sacrifice, and various kinds of sadhanas. And that's what our whole topic is here. So anye, others, juhvati, they offer, they make this particular offering, this particular kind of sadhana, spiritual practice. What do they offer? Shrotradini indriyani. Excuse me. They offer their indriyas, sense organs, shrotradini, like shrotra, hearing, sight, taste, smell, and touch. These 5 senses, they offer their 5 senses where Samyama Agnishu. They offer the five senses Agnishu into the fire of samyama, self-restraint. A little poetic here, and certainly metaphoric. They offer their senses into the fire of self-restraint. Here, the sadhana being discussed is one of self-control. We often use the word dhamma to describe that process of self-control, discipline, physical discipline. And that discipline is one of the prerequisites, really, for undertaking a life of spiritual practice. Before you can sit and concentrate on prayer or study, your body has to be disciplined. So in that process of discipline, like in meditation, you have to restrain your senses from wandering. So when you hear a stray sound, you can't be distracted by that. You don't want to be distracted by anything around you. You close your eyes. If you feel some discomfort in your leg, you don't want to be distracted by that. So you withdraw your five senses. And here, figuratively speaking, you offer your five senses into the fire of self-control. This is using that metaphor of the yagna. Again, the basic meaning of yagna is sacrifice. Sacrifice means you make an offering. And here, what you're offering is your involvement with the world. You're offering into the fire of self-control the pleasure you receive from your five senses. You are offering that into the fire of self-control. In general, the whole symbolism of yagna, this sacrificial worship, is you are sacrificing ordinary worldly pleasure. You are sacrificing that pleasure for the sake of spiritual growth, for the sake of sadhana, some spiritual practice. Then we have another practice in the second half. In the first half, you are offering your senses, sense organs, into the fire of self-control. In the second half, you're offering the objects of the senses. That is, the objects you hear, smell, taste, and so forth. He says, Shabdadin Vishayan, start at the end of the third line. Anye, the A of anye drops due to some grammar rules. Anye, and then down below, as before, Juhvati. Anye, Juhvati, others offer. Others who perform different kinds of spiritual practices, they offer, metaphorically offer. What do they offer? Third line, Vishayan, objects, Shabdadin, like the sounds you hear, like sounds, tastes, smells, things that you touch, the sense objects, the perceptions are offered Indriya Agnishu, into the fire of the senses. In the prior verse, you were offering into the fire of self-control. Now the sense objects are being offered into the fire of the senses. This is a metaphor, and a little obscure. Here's how it works. Whatever you offer into that ritual fire is consumed by that ritual fire and metaphorically transported to the gods. Here, you are offering sense objects through the senses. Like whatever you see is being offered within. Whatever you hear is being offered within. But then instead of being enjoyed, whatever you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, instead of just taking in all these sense perceptions for the sake of enjoyment, they are being offered into the fire of the indriyas, senses. And in this metaphor, we could say that the fire of the senses, Indriya Agnishu, represents that inner divinity. And here comes a very beautiful metaphor. Whatever you see is consumed by your eyes, so to speak, and offered within, offered unto the inner divinity. Whatever you hear, the sounds that you hear, are consumed, as it were, by the ears and offered into the inner divinity. So too with the sense of touch and smell and taste. Whatever you smell or taste is consumed and offered unto God's presence within you. Now this is a very beautiful perspective and a very beautiful sadhana. And it has a very important consequence for our day-to-day behavior. If you understand that whatever you consume, so to speak, with your five senses is being offered unto God, in a manner of speaking, as that inner divinity, then what you're going to offer should be carefully chosen. When you're making offerings into that ritual fire, you use ghee, clarified water. You use rice, seed, some other things. You don't put a crumpled piece of paper into that fire. That would be disrespectful. That would be wrong. It would be sinful. So you choose carefully what you offer into that ritual fire. And here, you choose carefully whatever you consume with your senses and offer unto the divinity within, which means you choose carefully what you see. Consider the programming you watch on television. Some of it is very good. Some of it may not be so good. Perhaps you should be more selective in what you watch on TV. Movies, of course. There are wonderful movies, but there are some terrible movies also. Movies with sex and violence, and movies which are, let's say, unhealthy in a manner of speaking. And those movies shouldn't be consumed, as it were, by your eyes and ears, because you're taking those impurities within yourself and offering them, as it were, at the altar of your heart. It goes also for music. Chances are the music you listen to is very good, but there is some kinds of rap music which is very violent and misogynist. And when youngsters are consuming this music, they're bringing those impurities within. So we want to be cautious and selective about whatever it is in the world that we allow inside us through these gates. These senses are often called gateways to the world. So through the gateways of your eyes, you allow images in. Through the gateways of your ears, you allow sounds in. Through the gateways of your nostrils and mouth, you allow smells and tastes in. So we should be careful and selective in whatever we allow through these gateways, honoring that divinity within. We should only allow pure and sacred and holy and uplifting things, good things, just good things. Allow good things through those gateways and reject anything that's less than good. Okay, let us proceed. Sarvan indriya karmani, sarvan indriya karmani, prana karmani Ch.4, prana karmani Ch.4, atma samyama yogagnau, atma samyama yogagnau, juhvati jnana dipite, juhvati jnana dipite. Related to the same kind of attitude, same kind of sadhana, spiritual practices we bring towards our daily activities. End of the second line, apare, cha apare, and others performing other kinds of sadhana, other kinds of practices. What do? Beginning of the fourth line, they juhvati, apare juhvati, others offer, and this again, staying with that yagna symbolism, sadhana, spiritual practice, as making various kinds of offerings. What kinds of offerings are made here? So others offer, top line, sarvani indriya karmani. Indriya karma are the activities of our senses. Sarvani, all the activities of our senses are juhvati, are, and prana karmani cha, in the second line. So all the activities of our indriyas, our senses, and our senses could be a reference here not only just to our 5 sense organs, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch, but also to our organs of action, organs of grasping, walking, talking. They include also the organ of excretion and the sexual organ. So all of these 5 plus 5, and then they add in one more, because the mind can be considered also an indriya, sense organ. So all of these 11 organs and their activities, the activities of our 5 senses, the activities of grasping and walking and talking, and the activities of our mind, all these activities, prana karmani cha, and the activities of our prana. Prana here in general refers to the life force, the force that infuses our body with energy and strength. So all of those activities of our senses and prana, they are all juhvati. They are all offered where? Third line, atma, samyama, yoga, agnau. It's one long compound word. We get the meaning often, reading right to left. Agnau is a form of agni, fire. So they are offered into the agni, the fire. What kind of fire? Yoga agni, the fire of yoga. Yoga meaning spiritual practice here. What is that spiritual practice? Samyama, control. So they're offered into the fire of self-control and samyama, control, but control of atma here simply means self. Atma samyama means self-control. So all of the activities of our 5 senses, our 5 powers of action, our mind, and our prana, life force, all of these activities are offered metaphorically. Excuse me. Metaphorically offered into the fire. There's our yagna symbolism again, metaphor. They're offered into the fire of self-control. Here's our yagna symbolism. Everything, and let me just interpret it in a more general sense. If you are truly committed to spiritual growth, means your sadhana, your spiritual practice, is not merely what you do when you're watching this video. Your spiritual practice is not merely what you do when you're praying or meditating. Your spiritual practice extends throughout the day. I think we discussed long ago that karma yoga is a method of converting ordinary tasks into a form of spiritual practice. And by doing that, by converting your ordinary activities into spiritual practices, you become a full-time spiritual aspirant. This is how it works. You can be engaged in spiritual practice full-time by converting your ordinary activities into spiritual practice. And that's what's being discussed here, that all of the activities of your mind, your senses, your organs of action, and your prana, your life force, all of these activities are metaphorically offered into the fire of self-control. Self-control means you deliberately choose to follow dharma instead of being driven by raga, dvesha. We've discussed this several times. The self-control here specifically, atma samyama, self-control here, specifically is using your will to turn away, to resist the compulsion of raga, dvesha. Using your willpower to resist the compulsion of raga, dvesha, and instead to follow dharma. That is a wonderful spiritual practice you can do throughout the day. And in this way, all of your activities are metaphorically offered into the fire of self-control, the fire of self-control which, last word, is jnana dipite. The fire of self-control which is dipita, which is shining with jnana, with knowledge, with wisdom. This means that we are bringing our Vedantic perspective to bear on all of our activities throughout the day. Everything you do counts, right? Every deed bears karma and bears a phala of fruit, which means everything you do throughout each day has consequences, both good consequences and undesirable consequences. So here, by exercising self-control, by using your willpower to resist the force of raga, dvesha, by using your willpower to set aside merely pursuing pleasure, and to use your willpower to direct your life on that path of sadhana, on your path of spiritual growth. This is converting your whole life into a form of spiritual practice. And here, metaphorically, it is to offer all your activities into the fire of self-control. That's our yagna symbolism here, yagna metaphor. Okay, next verse. Dravya yajnastapo yajna, dravya yajnastapo yajna, yoga yajnastatapare, yoga yajnastatapare, swadhyaya jnana yajnascha, swadhyaya jnana yajnascha, yataya samshitavrataha, yataya samshitavrataha. So talking about many different sadhakas. Sadhaka means spiritual aspirant. One who practices sadhana, spiritual practice, is a sadhaka, someone who is on a spiritual path. And those sadhakas, those spiritual aspirants, include dravya yajnaha. Dravya yajnaha are those who do yagna, sacrifice of dravya, physical things. So to offer offerings, sacrificial offerings into a fire. Those people are dravya yajnaha. Also, how about just a wider interpretation here? Those who do acts of charity. To give money or goods to someone who needs and deserves your support, that's a kind of dravya yajna. You are making an offering of some money or something else that's valuable to you. You're offering not into a ritual fire, you're offering to another human being Of course, you see the parallel here. You offer something into a ritual fire, it's transported metaphorically to God. You offer some charity to a human being. Within that human being is divinity. God dwells within that divinity. So whether you're making an offering into a sacrificial fire or whether you're making a charitable offering to another human being, ultimately, you're offering to Ishvara, the God of the cosmos. So those people are dravya yagnaha, those who offer various kinds of oblations. Then there are others who are tapo yagnaha. Tapas is austerity. Yagnaha, those who practice yagna, sacrifice of tapas, of austerity. Perhaps the most common form of tapas is fasting. And we're not talking about fasting for the sake of losing weight. We're talking about fasting as a spiritual practice. How does fasting work as a spiritual practice? You deliberately undergo some suffering, and by deliberately undergoing some suffering, you start to weaken the effects of raga dvesha, correct? So raga dvesha is when we are constantly driven to avoid any kind of suffering. We chase after what we want, we run away from what we don't want, but tapas, austerity here, is to willfully and deliberately, freely choose to undergo some kind of suffering, and the effect of that, the very immediate effect of that, is to overcome raga and dvesha. And then staying with our metaphor, it's considered a form of yagna, offering, which is to say that the suffering you undergo is dedicated to spiritual growth, which leads you closer to Ishvara. It's being done as a form of prayer. In fact, that would differentiate fasting from diet. Diet is done for the sake of your body. Fasting is a form of prayer. You dedicate your discomfort to Ishvara. It becomes a prayerful practice in that it leads you closer to Ishvara. How does it lead you closer to Ishvara? By promoting spiritual growth. How does fasting promote spiritual growth? By helping you overcome raga, dvesha. Excuse me. Those are tapo yagnaha. They perform the sacrifice of tapas, austerity. Then there are others, in the end of the second line, tata, in the same way, apare. There are others who are yoga yagnaha. Others who perform the yagna, the sacrifice of yoga. And yoga, of course, yoga includes the physical asanas, the postures that people practice, but yoga includes so much more. Really speaking, yoga is ultimately a practice of meditation. So all of those asanas, the postures that are practiced, are meant to prepare you for formal seated meditation. So we'll take yoga in a more traditional way here. Yoga means meditation in this context, and those who perform the sacrifice of meditation. What is the sacrifice of meditation? We discussed before. You close your eyes. You sacrifice the world. You withdraw from your attention from stray sounds. You are withdrawing. You are sacrificing all kinds of worldly involvement, sacrificing all kinds of worldly pleasures for the sake of turning your attention within. That is yoga yagna. The sacrifice of yoga, the sacrifice of meditation, is to sacrifice all worldly pleasures and all worldly involvements are sacrificed temporarily at the time of meditation when you withdraw from all those activities and turn your attention within. Turn your attention within, of course, towards the divinity within you. There are others also. Those who are swadhyaya and jnana yagnaha. There are actually two words here. Swadhyaya yagna and jnana yagna. Two more kinds of sacrifices that people practice. Swadhyaya yagnaha are those who perform the sacrifice of swadhyaya, spiritual study. So right now you're watching this video, that is swadhyaya, that is spiritual study. So spiritual study is a form of sacrifice. After all, you could be doing so many other things right now, running around and having some kind of fun, but instead of running around and having fun, you are sitting quietly and focusing your attention on this spiritual study. That's a form of sacrifice. Swadhyaya yagna, sacrifice of spiritual study. The last one here is jnana yagna, the sacrifice of knowledge. And one way of interpreting the sacrifice of knowledge is teaching. So I also could be engaged in so many other activities right now, but I have withdrawn from all those other activities, and instead I've chosen to engage in the act of teaching. So to sacrifice other activities for the sake of teaching is called here jnana yagna. My Parama Guru, my teacher's teacher, Swami Chinmayananda, Gurudev, was famous for using this expression to describe his spiritual discourses. He spent his lifetime teaching all over the world, teaching countless thousands of people, and every discourse he gave, he called it jnana yagna, a sacrifice of knowledge. He dedicated himself to a life of teaching. Very beautiful. So all of these people performing all of these different kinds of spiritual practices, all of these spiritual practices which are forms of sacrifice, metaphorically making offerings into some kind of metaphorical fire, meaning sacrificing means setting aside things that you could do, worldly activities and pleasures, and dedicating yourself instead to sadhana, your spiritual practice. All of these people here are called yatayaha, yati. Now, yati is an interesting word because it often means monk, sannyasi, but it literally means one who strives. Yatna shila is the definition of the word. One who is engaged in striving. So one who strives for spiritual growth is a yati. So all of these described in these verses, all of them are yatayaha, plural. They are all striving, they're all aspirants for spiritual growth, and they are all samshita vrataha. Vrata literally means a vow, but we'll take it in a broader sense here. Vrata, in a sense, not a vow in general, vow in particular, but a commitment in general. So everyone we've discussed in this verse, all of them are committed to a life of spiritual growth. And being committed to a life of spiritual growth, they are samshita, they are purified. So all of these sadhakas, all of these spiritual aspirants, being intensely committed to a life of spiritual growth, they are purified. Purified in what samshita literally means purified, but purified in what sense? Make the connection. They're purified of raga dvesha. They are becoming increasingly free of the compulsivity of raga dvesha, and to the extent that they're free from raga dvesha, to that extent they focus their attention exclusively on spiritual growth. And their spiritual growth becomes fruitful because it's not interrupted by raga dvesha. Okay, there are others. This topic continues. Apane juhvati pranam, apane juhvati pranam, prane panam tata pare, prane panam tata pare, prana panagati rudhva, prana panagati rudhva, pranayama parayanaha, pranayama parayanaha. So there are some, talking about the practice of yoga. Yoga includes not just the performance of asanas, these postures to prepare you for meditation, but yoga also includes the performance of breathing exercises, again, to prepare you for meditation. These breathing exercises done as a preparatory step for meditation in the practice of yoga are called pranayama. Pranayama, breathing exercises done for this to prepare you for meditation. And here, there's a beautiful metaphor used here, referring to both prana and apana. There are said to be 5 different kinds of prana, life force. They can be defined in different ways. A very common definition is prana is inhalation, and another one of the 5 is called apana. Prana is inhalation, apana is exhalation. So these are 2 of the 5 pranas, 5 kinds of life forces that invigorate our bodies. So there are some who, juhvati, who offer pranam, they offer inhalation apane, into exhalation. It's a just poetic metaphor. There are some who offer inhalation into exhalation, and then end of the next line, tata apare, tata, and similarly, apare, others offer apanam, inhalation, exhalation, prane, into inhalation. Some offer their inhalation into the exhalation, some offer the exhalation into the inhalation. It's a metaphor, obviously, but it's a way of understanding this practice of pranayama, breath control not in a merely mechanical way. It can be very mechanical. You inhale to the count of say 3, you hold your breath to the count of 6, and then you exhale to the count of 12. There are so many different ways of doing this. So that's a mechanical practice of pranayama. Here, we're looking at that sadhana, that spiritual practice of pranayama, not in a purely mechanical way, but through the lens of Vedanta. Just as the Yagna, making offerings into the ritual fire, was reinterpreted in this Vedantic way, here we're reinterpreting the practice of pranayama in a Vedantic way. And here you can think of when you inhale, you are offering that air. That air is being offered to the divinity within. When you exhale, air is being offered to the divinity without. After all, Ishvara pervades the world. Ishvara is within, Ishvara is without. So with each inhalation, you are offering air into the divinity within. With each exhalation, you're offering air unto the Ishvara who pervades the cosmos. This is a very profound way of interpreting what could be a very mechanical practice. To inhale to the count of 3, hold your breath for the count of 6, exhale for the count of 12. It works. It's a very good practice, pranayama, but it can be very mechanical. So through this particular teaching of Sri Krishna, we bring this very beautiful Vedantic perspective to the practice of pranayama. The inhalation is an offering, yagna. Exhalation is an offering, yagna. That's the whole theme here. In the third line, prana, apana, gati, rudhva. And rudhva, having controlled the gati, the movement of prana, inhalation, and apana, exhalation. This is the inhale to the count of 3. Hold your breath to the count of 6. Exhale to the count of 12. This is control of the flow of your breath. This practice is done by whom? Pranayama parayanaha. By those who are committed to the practice of pranayama. So if you are going to be committed to the practice of pranayama, let it not merely be a mechanical practice. You can bring these beautiful teachings to bear upon that practice so that every motion of your breath is a prayer. Inhalation is a prayer, offering air unto the divinity within. Exhalation is a prayer, offering unto the divinity outside. Every breath is a prayer. How many times a day do you breathe? And every breath can be converted into a prayer through these teachings. We'll continue. Apare niyata haraha, apare niyata haraha, pranan praneshu juhvati, pranan praneshu juhvati, sarve pyete yagna vido, sarve pyete yagna vido, yagnakshapita kalmashaha, yagnakshapita kalmashaha. More kinds of sadhana. Apare, others, and the second line, juhvati, others offer. What do they offer? They offer, others offer pranan praneshu. Others offer pranan. The 5 pranas are offered praneshu, into the pranas. The pranas are offered into the pranas. This is very metaphorical. And who are they? And this is a key word here in the first line, niyata aharaha. Ahara is what you take in, often what you eat. Niyata, control. So those who control what they eat, by controlling what you eat, you offer your pranas. Here's the correct meaning. You offer the prana of what you... So here we've got 2 pranas here. So we have to differentiate which prana is what. So pranan are offered praneshu, into the prana. Pranan means the prana of the food is offered praneshu, into the prana within your body. When you take food, the prana of the food is offered to the prana of your body. That's what this means. Pranan, praneshu juhvati. Pranan, the prana that's inherent in the food. Praneshu, unto the prana of your body. Juhvati is offered. Offered by whom? Niyata aharaha, by those who control their eating. And control of your eating, here again, we're not talking about diet, but we're talking about offering whatever you take in, just like whatever you see, hear, taste, smell, or touch is offered to the divinity within. Therefore, you should be choosy about movies and TV, etc. Here we're talking about food. Whatever food you eat is also offered to the divinity within. So you should be choosy about the food you eat. Not out of, not as a matter of diet, but as a matter of spiritual practice. So food that is very old, food that is stinking, food that is unhealthy in any way whatsoever. And that can include, by the way, food that is too spicy, food that is has too much fat, food that has too much sugar. All of these, your doctor has already told you, too much fat and sugar in your diet. Certainly my doctor has told me that. So whatever you eat is being offered to the divinity within, so we should be very selective about choosing foods that are very healthy. Much later in the Bhagavad Gita, he'll talk about which kinds of foods are, Sri Krishna will describe which kinds of foods are sattvika, which kinds of foods are rajasika, which kinds of foods are tamasika. This comes much later. But the idea here is whatever foods you're taking in are being offered to that inner divinity. So just as you don't offer anything inappropriate into that ritual fire, in the same way, you don't eat anything inappropriate. You don't offer anything inappropriate into that divinity within you. Sarve api ete. Ete, these sadhakas, these spiritual aspirants, sarve, all of them. All of these spiritual aspirants are yagnavits. Yagnavit is one who understands this yagna. And here, again, yagna we're using yagna in a metaphoric sense. This whole section of verses is yagna in a metaphoric sense. In the non-metaphoric sense, yagna means the ritual fire, making offerings into a ritual fire. But here, yagna is being extended into an attitude towards life, in which everything you do and anything you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, anything you ingest, anything you consume, all of your activities are converted into a kind of spiritual practice with this attitude of yagna, with the attitude of sacrifice. This makes you a yagnavit, one who knows this attitude of looking at activities of life as a kind of sacrifice. And the most basic way of understanding this sacrifice. So sacrifice in the sense of a spiritual practice, religious practice, not sacrifice of any other kind, but specifically sacrifice as a spiritual practice, sacrifice as a religious practice. Here, the sacrifice means to sacrifice mere worldly pleasures are sacrificed for the sake of spiritual growth. It's a very simple but powerful understanding. This is how we convert our lives from being engaged in mere worldly activities driven by raga dvesha. We gradually convert our lives by gradually breaking free from the control of raga dvesha and directing our activities instead towards spiritual growth. This is the yagna. This is life as yagna, life as ritual worship, life as sacrifice. And in this way, yagna, last word, Yagna Kshapita Kalmashaha. Third line, all of these people who have this attitude towards life, an attitude of sacrifice towards life, all of these people are Yagna Kshapita Kalmashaha. All of these people are, for all of these people, their kalmasha, their sins, their impurities, are kshapita, are removed through their yagna, through their sacrifice. So for all of these people, the literal translation, their sins are purified through the sacrifice. That's a very literal meaning, but now a contextual meaning here is the sins we're talking about is when you are dragged about by raga dvesha. So here, this force of raga dvesha is overcome through this practice of sacrifice, through your willful engagement in activities with this attitude of sacrifice, setting aside mere worldly pleasures for the sake of spiritual growth. Through that practice, very powerful practice, raga and dvesha are overcome, they are removed. And as I said before, when you are freed from raga dvesha, you have overcome the biggest impediment to gaining enlightenment. If you're freed from raga dvesha, gaining enlightenment is easy. If you're not freed from raga dvesha, gaining enlightenment is impossible. How's that? If you're not freed from raga dvesha, you'll never get enlightened, but by being free from raga dvesha, gaining enlightenment with the help of these teachings is quite literally easy. Okay, we'll see more in our next class. Just a quick announcement here at the end of today's class. September 23rd, next week, is the anniversary of Puja Swami Dayananda's Mahasamadhi. It's a very special day. We acknowledge his passing. His passing we call Mahasamadhi. In honor of his Mahasamadhi, on September 23rd, I'm going to release a very special video. I finished this video production some time ago, but I've been waiting for a special time to release the video. This is a special time, and it relates to him very much, to Puja Swami Dayananda. The topic of the video is kind of an interesting question. Can you become enlightened merely through meditation? Is meditation the key to make you enlightened? And when Puja Swami Dayananda was a young student, sadhaka, he struggled with this tremendously. It's a fascinating story. In fact, that the video tells the story of Puja Swami Dayananda's struggle with this particular issue. The issue is, what exactly is the role of meditation in gaining enlightenment? So on September 23rd, in honor of Puja Swami Dayananda, that video will be released. I'll also just mention that we're gradually beginning to reopen our ashram. We now have resumed our weekly satsang sessions, question-answer session on Sunday evenings. And in the coming weeks, we will begin, this class will become a live class, and we'll have students coming for the class. And as I said before, we will continue this online. So it'll be both live and simultaneously available online. That won't be disrupted at all. All this information is available on our website. Also on our website, you can sign up for program announcements, so you receive an email announcing all the reopening programs. Okay, we'll conclude with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhaveta, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma hamritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.